today's webinar. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Kerry Machin, who is a director of a company called Mitigo. And Kerry has over 25 years experience in the field of looking at cybersecurity and risk for companies as well. And he will take you through his presentation today. And then at the end, we'll go to a Q&A. You can put any questions that you have in the chat box in the top right-hand corner, and then I'll read out your questions at the end to Kerry. Today's session is also being recorded, and we will be sending slides out after the event, and also the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Kerry.
Thanks, Liz, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Without further ado, let's crack on because we've got an action-packed agenda today. So we're going to be talking about some of the bigger incidents and what we could learn from those from last year. I'm going to talk a bit about blind spots in defences. It's the blind spots and vulnerabilities that you aren't aware of that are going to get you, or where the threat actors are going to come and find you. And then we're going to start to look at, well, how should you be preparing for incidents? So what's the pre-work like? What's it like when you're in the midst of an attack, and the things that you might do after it? And then we'll try and give you some ideas of things that you might already be doing or that you might not be doing, and then we'll take it from there. I guess just a little bit about Mitigo. If you haven't heard of us before, it would be unusual if you're in the legal or accountancy profession not to have heard of us, as we work in those fields an awful lot. So we're partners to the Law Society of England, Wales and Scotland. We're also partners to the Bar Council, so we work with lots of barristers' chambers, and we're also partners to the Institute of Chartered Accountants for England and Wales and Institute of Chartered Accountants for Scotland, amongst others. We are CREST registered. We are National Cybersecurity Advisor, National Cybersecurity Centre advisors. We can do things like Cyber Essentials and all manner of other things cyber related. What we are not, and I think it's really important to stress this, is we're not an IT firm. A lot of people confuse cyber risk management with cyber security. Cyber security tends to be technical solutions that you would put in place, and I would imagine everybody joining today will have those. So you'll have things like endpoint controls, antivirus, multi-factor authentication, firewalls, and so on and so forth. We expect you to have those things, but yet businesses that have those things are still being affected by cyber breaches. And I guess part of today is to try and perhaps shed some light on why that might be and some of the further steps that you'd be able to take as we go through. So that's who we are. Right, before we get started, a little bit of audience participation. I know that Liz is just going to pop an interactive poll up on your screen. There it is. It just gives me a little bit of a flavour of the people I was going to say that are in the virtual room. So how prepared do you feel for a cyber incident? So let's see what you've got to say for yourselves. We'll give you 20 or 30 seconds just to fill it in. So I can see only one person, I think, thus far has done that. So come on, take part if you can. Thank you. I can see a couple more just coming on screen now. That's good. So we've got mostly prepared. 3 people there saying controls are in place, but we're not testing them. We've got one who's been very honest. Well, one that's 2 very honest, not very prepared. We know we should do more. No idea. It's not something we've looked at. And then someone right in the middle, we're somewhat prepared. I think what's interesting is nobody has clicked the top one. We're fully prepared, risk assessments, tested incident plan. Unfortunately, that's quite normal. Thanks, Liz. Yep, that's great. So that's quite normal that we see people putting things in place, but yet because there's been no testing, no checking, no proving, we see that you end up with blind spots, and you're going to end up the victim of cyber crime at some point because of that. Those that have no idea, I guess if it's not within your remit, then maybe hopefully somebody else is taking care of it. Those that are somewhat prepared, then hopefully today will be useful as well. Right, let's crack on to the next slide. Here we go. So I'm just going to talk briefly about what we call or refer to as the defining attacks of 2025. I know we're well into 26 now, but I think that they're still relevant. There was a lot to be learned from these attacks. There was Marks and Spencer's. So just to give you some details of that, it was a ransomware attack. That's the thing that we hear about the most, where it encrypts systems, it disrupts operations. There's lots of other things that can happen in ransomware attacks. Often they'll steal your data. So if you are tuning in from a law firm or an accountancy practice today, yes, they might encrypt your systems, but what they definitely want is your data, because they'll hold you to ransom over it on the dark web, unfortunately. What was interesting about this attack is the threat actors used social engineering. So they gained information that was available out on the internet about a third party, so somebody in the supply chain. They didn't attack Marks and Spencer's directly. They went through, as we understand it, a third-party IT help desk that was being outsourced that had access to the system. So they found information out about that third-party IT help desk from the internet, or the people operating it use that to trick them to give them access into M&S. And we're seeing, as you'll see, the themes as we go through this. Supply chain attack is rife at the moment. It's a good way for them to get in. We know the impact, because if you went to Marks and Spencer's, they either didn't have what you wanted, or if you went online, you couldn't buy anything that way. What was the impact? It was £300 million, we understand, of revenue loss. Only about 200 million of that was insured, as is what I understand it to be. So there was an actual loss to M&S. And I suppose one of the problems is that we might sit there thinking, well, that's M&S. It happens to them. It will never happen to me. Even when we move on to the likes of the Co-op as the next one, these are big organizations. They make the press because they are big organizations. But the reality is, and I do want you to understand this, is that it's never to do with size. If you have vulnerability, they will find it, they will exploit it. These are just ones that hit the headlines. But why I'm using them today is just to talk about the methods of access and the outcomes to it. So the Co-op was the same ransomware group affiliate that attacked M&S. So same people, same MO, modus operandi, social engineering through to third party into system access. Interesting, they lost about 200 million. But if you looked at I think it was the National Cybersecurity annual report last year, the chief exec of Co-op put an open letter in there talking about how proud she was of how Co-op had prepared for it, the attack, and actually how much worse it could have been if they weren't prepared. And so imagine that, you're saying it could have been a lot worse than 206 million pounds. So interesting, I think. Then on to one of the biggest attacks of all time, or certainly the outcome of it or the cost of it, with Jaguar Land Rover. My understanding that there was no cyber insurance on this one. We believe this was compromised credentials, so usernames, passwords, and it was a phishing attack. We don't know completely, but we believe that's what gave them the system access. We know that, there was a production disruption for 5-6 weeks. And the cost was nearly £1 billion. So, but what that was, remember, that was across the supply chain. There was a huge impact on the supply chain because they closed down their productions. So those are the big ones of last year. I must say we dealt with numerous attacks ourselves. Obviously we didn't deal with those three. Well, it's not necessarily obvious, but we didn't deal with those three. But we dealt with plenty from much smaller firms who had lots of things in place, thought that they were protected, but unfortunately had vulnerabilities that they weren't aware of. So the lessons learned here is humans and processes were exploited, unidentified risks within the supply chain. There were clearly gaps in governance. But what I think the biggest lesson to learn here is none of those were technical controls. The amount of businesses that we go to work with, where they say, my IT are looking after this and I've got it all covered. what have you. It's not all technical. You've got to consider the people, you've got to consider the technical, and you've got to consider the governance aspect of it. And if you're not doing those three things, those three pillars of cyber risk management, then the chances are you will have risk that exists that you don't fully, unfortunately, understand. So just to sort of give you a flavor of supply chain attacks by way of a graphic, if you like, you're sat in the middle, you've got clients, so the threat actors are trying to get into your client systems, so they might get into their email systems, which then they send an email as your client to you. You click on it, they can potentially get into your system. The next is they're going to directly try to access you, or they're going to try and come through any of your other providers, service providers on the left hand side there. So it could be your managed service provider, could be a supplier, could be a cloud service, could be any of those things. And bear in mind, this is the thing why it shouldn't be coming down just to your IT to look after your cyber risk management, because they are an integral part of your supply chain. They are marking their own homework if you are leaving it to them. And that's a conflict of interest, and it's clearly not working for quite a lot of organizations out there. If we look at the current attack trends that threat actors are using, so supply chain infiltration, why are they using supply chain infiltration? Think about this. There are two things that a threat actor needs in order to conduct a successful cyber attack. The first is to bypass your perimeter security. So supply chain infiltration bypasses your perimeter security because they've got through without having to necessarily use things like passwords, MFA avoidance, or anything like that. They've just been given access, carte blanche access into your systems. So the first is perimeter security. The second is the wherewithal to do whatever they want once they get into your system. I'm going to use a case study in a minute just to demonstrate that. So, but current attack trends, supply chain, social engineering, so picking up as much information as they can very quickly off the dark web and using that against you. They can use that in phishing emails. AI is producing far better phishing emails than we've seen. They're far more realistic. The grammar's better, the English is better, because typically they come from abroad. They'll be, badged up if they're pretending to come from a supplier or something like that. Very difficult to spot. And actually phishing services are getting more technical, and they're able to bypass your multi-factor authentication. So those of you that are putting a heavy reliance on MFA, you're going to need other controls that sit in the background, and a multi-layered approach, if you like, as well. Some of the threat actors are attacking password managers that you have in your browser extension. So if you save your password to your internet browser, they're learning to attack those, because typically they're cloud-based, and if you've got poor security controls around them, they can steal your passwords from there. And we're starting to see, I say starting to see, we've seen it for a long time, vishing attacks, but where they're changing their vishing, this is where they phone up, and a voice attack effectively, is we're starting to see them leveraging native English speakers. So rather than it being, I don't know, let's say the attack's coming out of India or it's coming out of Russia, and someone phoning, with a heavy accent, the likelihood now is a phishing attack. They'll be paying somebody that's native to this country, and you're far more likely to believe them and let them into your systems, because that's what they're trying to do. Moving on. I was posed this question earlier in the year, and I thought it was a really good question. Someone said to me, what's the one thing firms almost say they thought they had under control when they've had a cyber breach, but they didn't? And I think the simple answer is they thought their IT was looking after it. They just thought it was under control because that's what IT do, isn't it? Right? And unfortunately, it isn't. And as I say, what I want to do now is I want to use a case study of a rather unfortunate firm that we dealt with about 8 weeks ago. And I'll just get on with it, but it starts to demonstrate a few things. It'll demonstrate blind spots. It'll demonstrate over-reliance on IT. This isn't me IT bashing, by the way. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're not an IT firm. But every client that we work with have IT firms, and we work alongside them. We work out what the problem is, what the risk is, and we work with the IT firm to put technical controls in, but we'd work with the business to put policy in, to put governance, to give them regulatory and legislative compliance, which is what you're going to need to have as well. So anyway, on with the case study. So I'm going to jump forward to Saturday. And on Saturday, some members of staff, it was an accountancy practice, they decided that they wanted to work remotely and access their system via their remote desktop that they were using. And they recognized that they couldn't access the systems remotely. And so when it was reported to somebody, they got hold of the managed service provider, so their IT firm, so MSP for short, I'm going to use that going forward. MSP were contacted on the Saturday, and they confirmed that there was a ransomware attack and their system had been encrypted, which is the reason why they couldn't get into the system. So not good news. What happened then is the MSP effectively tried to attempt to restore from the backup from the previous day, from Friday. Unfortunately, the backup from Friday was encrypted, so they could not do that. And so what they then did is they went back to Thursday's data backup, and they managed to restore the system. What was unusual here is if one day has been encrypted, generally the whole backup has been encrypted. The firm were very lucky that they had any backup at all to restore from. So there was clearly a problem in the way that the backup had been designed. But the good news is they got Thursday's backup. They only lost Friday's work, and effectively over the course of the Saturday and the Sunday, the MSP brought the firm back up and running. Everybody breathed a sigh of relief. Happy days. Until we got to Tuesday thereafter, and clients and staff started to receive emails from the threat actors, and they were stating that they had their data, and they put little snippets of data to prove that they had it. It was at this point where the accountancy practice recognized that they hadn't identified the full extent of the cyber attack, the ransomware attack, because they were given a clean bill of health. And unfortunately, they now needed to understand how much data had been exfiltrated as part of the attack. So we were engaged, and as you can imagine, it was, we need to know what's going on, and we need to know what's going on pretty quickly. So we started to do some forensic work and see what had happened. And when we started to have a look at the attack, what we recognized is that the threat actors had actually delivered the ransomware, the malware payload, the previous Tuesday. Okay, and what that meant is that when they restored from the Thursday, unfortunately, they restored the ransomware back into their system over the course of the weekend. So effectively, when it came to us on Tuesday, the ransomware was back in there. The criminals effectively had access to the system again. And more importantly, where we had a problem was they had deleted all of the information that had happened over the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, because they'd restored from Thursday. Now, what happened on the Saturday and Sunday was the data exfiltration. And because they'd overwritten those files, we couldn't tell what data had been taken. And that was a huge problem for the client, because they need to be able to, A, let their clients know that their data has been compromised, and B, they need to let their regulators, or the ICO, or the IC as it's now known, know what data has been taken. And we couldn't tell them that. We just knew that there had been a large amount of data taken, just by the fact that, you know, when we look at the dark web, we could see that there was large amounts, but we couldn't tell exactly what. Their systems should have been able to tell us all of these things, but because they got it horribly wrong, they didn't. So why did it happen? Well, the first thing, the way they got in was through their firewall. It was what we call a brute force attack. There was 200,000 attempts with passwords at the firewall. And eventually it got through. So the firewall was just not configured strongly enough. It shouldn't have been able to be breached in that way. And in fact, once you get a certain number of attempts at it, incorrect attempts, it should either shut down or alert somebody to tell them that there's some activity going on that shouldn't be. the antivirus quarantined the malware. So as the payload, the ransomware payload was delivered into the network, antivirus did what it should do. There's different types of antivirus. This wasn't a very sophisticated one, so I will start with that. But it did its job. It put it into quarantine, and that should have been the end of that. If it had alerted the right people, then it could have been deleted. Unfortunately, there were no alerts on the antivirus, and the threat actors already had access to the network. They took a foothold. They increased their level to administrator within the network, and they disabled the antivirus and released the ransomware into the system. So this is one of those where you've got something that can do the job, and you thought it was doing the job. Well, that's the firewall and the antivirus, and it failed because it wasn't set up correctly. The backup was compromised. That shouldn't happen. It's not unusual. We see a lot of backups get compromised in ransomware attacks, generally because people are considering, or IT tend to consider, how long it would take to restore from backup. Actually, the question that we ask is, can we get to the backup in the ransomware attack and take it out? Which obviously you can. Data exfiltration, there were no data loss tools that would have prevented this from happening. There were no logs that told us what was going on, so that was all quite a mess. And the malware was restored, as I mentioned to you. So the MSP's response was inappropriate because they didn't really understand the anatomy of how this attack works, what cyber criminals and threat actors are going to do. And as you can see on the right hand side, the impact on the firm is obviously they have to report that to the IC and their regulator, so they might be fined. They've certainly had some reputational damage because they've had to tell their clients that their data has been compromised. It was very stressful. It's not unusual. It's very personal to business owners if they're under attack, and this business, as you can see at the bottom, there's a bit of a punchline. They were going through a due diligence process to sell their business, so that's obviously going to be quite upsetting, and there's obviously a significant cost to getting this resolved as well. And what did the client say to us? I thought my IT were dealing with this, which takes me back to a couple of slides ago. Is that's generally the position that firms are in. It's the wrong people are doing the wrong job here, and that there's just a misunderstanding of who's responsible for it. The responsibility for cyber risk management falls on the firm, not on the IT company or the MSP. There needs to be a discussion, but there needs to be much more than that, and that's what we'll start to look at as we go through this. But just to sort of bring home, I suppose, why it's also not an IT's job. We carry out vulnerability audits, risk assessments, if you like, on firms. As I mentioned, we work with lots of law firms, lots of accountancy practices, and lots of financial services firms. And when we do our audit, we look at the technical configuration that they have. So they all have these things in place, as you will. And we took a ring-fenced 500 audits and said, right, okay, what were the critical risk ratings percentages on those audits in these areas, which are all technical? From a user access management perspective, 96% of them had critical issues. What that meant is it's very, very easy for a threat actor to get into the system. The access management was poor. Internet facing 365 MFA, so multi-factor authentication, 77% of them haven't got it set up correctly. That could be that they've got some systems or people where it's not set up, or it's just not set up correctly, it's configured badly, and that's 3/4. If you're relying on these systems to protect you, and we can see these numbers, the chances are they're going to fail. Security updates missing. 3/4 of the people firms that we work with have security updates missing. The similar amount on email security. Everybody tells us they've got email security. Almost 3/4 of them have it set up incorrectly or not at all. Antivirus, everybody's got it. 65% set up incorrectly. And network security, be that cloud or on-premise, just over half of them. So it just starts to ring true that it's not just an IT problem. IT generally, there's some great IT companies out there, but you've got to have somebody checking their homework. So let's agree that cyber incidents are inevitable. Okay, it's going to happen. In law firms alone last year, there was a 77% increase in cyber attacks, cyber breaches. That's from the Law Society of England and Wales, not our own stats. So what you do now determines the likelihood of an attack, the impact of that attack, and the recovery speed and cost of that attack. How, is it going to happen? How bad is it going to be? And how quickly can I get back up and running? So what you do first, what you do now pre-incident, really will determine that outcome. And then obviously if it does go wrong, then you do need to be doing something. You're going to need to know what you're going to do in those circumstances. So there is something called the Cyber Governance Code of Practice. It's a government code that came out last year, and I'm just going to go briefly through the 5 steps that they suggest that you should be going through in order to manage your risk pre-incident, if you like. And this is exactly what we would be saying to firms. So the first is risk assessment. So, do you conduct risk assessments? Have you had any form of vulnerability assessment conducted on your security? And if so, who's doing it? It should be, as I've mentioned, and I know I sound like I'm a broken drum, it should be someone independent of your MSP. That's because A, they shouldn't be doing it because it's marking their own homework, and B, actually, if you look at the third point here, the scope is wider than technology alone. You have to take into account people. 85% of breaches as a result of a human being doing something they shouldn't do. So understand the behaviors, the business processes that are going to allow criminals to take advantage of your people. Yes, you must include your technology, but then you must drive policy, then you must drive governance. You need to take into account your regulatory and your legal responsibilities. That's not a job for IT, that's a job for cyber risk management experts like us. And how often should you do that risk assessment? I would suggest that you do that every year. Why? You're going to change what you do every year, the way that you operate, and criminals certainly change the way they operate. Every time you put better security in place, they need to work out how to get around it. Moving on, the risk assessment then defines your strategy, which is step 2. What is your cyber strategy? How are you going to make decisions on how you manage your cyber risk? Well, if you understand your cyber risk, then you can start to make better decisions about what it is you want to do. You're not just going to spend money blindly. I see a lot of companies spend money on expensive technical equipment recommended by their MSP, and when we come in, we say, well, why did you buy that? And it was like, well, it seemed like a good idea. Well, how about having a strategy? How about carrying out a risk assessment, understanding what your problems are, and then working out what it is you want to buy and how you configure it? That's what cyber strategy allows you to do. And it allows you to actually give you some more peace of mind. I know the problem. I know what it is I'm going to do about it. From a people perspective, I've already mentioned this, but a large percentage of these cyber crimes are as a result of human being. We like to think we're smart, but we fall for phishing emails, we fall for scams. Everybody that we deal with that's a victim of a cyber crime sit there saying, didn't think it happened to me. You never do. But criminals have got to get it right once. You've got to be right all the time, and so do your people. So understand that behavioural and procedural risk that you've got. What business processes have you got that would allow a threat actor to come in and take the money off of you or your clients? Do you undertake cyber awareness training? Make sure you do. It's not expensive to conduct, so train your staff. Test the training, carry out things like simulated phishing. It's important, and have a good culture. Have it from the top, have it through there. You don't have to beat the drum every day, all day about it, but at the same time, let's make sure that if there are rules for some people, that everybody's following the rules, and the people at the top are saying, well, that doesn't apply to me. It applies to everybody. Otherwise, those people have gaps as well. Incident response plan. You'd be surprised how many organizations don't have any form of incident response plan. Back in 2024, we saw these results in 25, which are the latest government stats. 78% of firms don't have an incident response plan. You need to know what it is you're going to do if this goes wrong, because it will go wrong very quickly, and you're going to need to take these steps. So get your risk assessment done. Tells you your problems. It'll put a lot of fixes in place for you. But then you create a response team. You have clearly defined roles. You establish communication guidelines, because in the midst of a cyber breach, you're going to need to be able to tell your staff, what's the communication with them, with your clients. The press will phone you because they find out, because they monitor the dark web, and cyber criminals publish information to say that they've attacked certain firms, and you're going to need to know what to say to your regulators. More often than not, I've got to be honest with you, firms struggle with what it is they're going to say to the Information Commissioner at all, because they don't understand their reporting duties. And unfortunately, the requirements there are far more than you think, which is you must be conducting risk assessments. That's a requirement of GDPR. Emergency contact procedure: you can't use your email system when you're under attack, or your phone system at work, because the criminals are probably in there and can see what you're doing. You need to understand how serious this risk is at that time as well. You need to train your staff, you need to train your response team, you need to have your backups and recovery tested, ready to go, understand that they're going to withstand the breach. More importantly, you need to test this plan. You need to do desktop reviews or tabletop exercises on incident response planning. I must say, in the last 6 months, this has been something that we're seeing more and more firms come to us for, is to say, we've got an incident response plan, and can we test it, because we need to know it's going to work. Those of you that don't have a plan, I urge you to get one. And if you've got one, if you haven't tested it, get it tested. It's a really good idea. And then the final part of the code of practice is assurance and oversight. Now, independent assurance gives you an unbiased evaluation. If you think about someone like Mitigo, if we do the risk assessment on you, because we're not an IT firm, we don't sell the solution, so we wouldn't sell you the products. So you get an unbiased opinion of what it looks like. We're not your IT firm, so we're not trying to sort of make it sound like we're okay, and we're not going to sell you any solutions at the back of it. So you get the best advice that you can. That gives you better risk management out of it. Obviously, it improves your compliance, or will at least make you compliant in the first instance. Strategically, you can make better decisions. Other stakeholders within the organization are going to get more confidence. If you've got backers, financial backers, that will certainly help them. And it allows you to adapt to the evolving threats. As I've mentioned, criminals get better and better at this all the time. So practical steps to strengthen your resilience is independent risk assessments, implement a good strategy, and its governance, assurance, and oversight. And effectively, what that does is it proves that your strategy is working. You're not hoping that it works. And there's too many firms out there that hope that this is okay, and that gives you peace of mind. I bet there's people here today that have spent money on this and still sit there thinking, I'm not sure that I've done what I should have done. But you're reticent to spend more money because you're thinking, well, I've already spent some more and I still don't feel confident. That's what this does. This allows you to know that you're doing the right things, and it gives you that peace of mind as well. So from a Mitigo perspective, we deliver, so sorry, bit of self-promotion, I guess, but we do risk assessments. We've got all manner of services, penetration testing, simulate the attacks, training, supply chain assurance. We can do all of those things. We are, as I mentioned at the beginning, registered cyber advisors for the NCSC. We're CRESTA accredited. We can do cyber essentials. We can do pretty much anything you need. My final thoughts on this, before perhaps we look at some questions here, is preparation is everything. You know, what you do now will make a huge difference. This is a leadership responsibility. Don't leave this to your IT firm. Okay, it's not that they're not good at what they do. If they're a good IT firm, they're a good IT firm. Doesn't make them cybersecurity experts. You are expected to do this. There's a legal and regulatory requirement. No matter who your regulator is, they expect you to follow the law and keep your clients' data safe. And your clients expect it. And do you know what? You should expect it of yourself as well, I suppose, just morally. And we can help you. So we've got another little poll before we do the Q&A. Look, sometimes these sessions drive interest in, you know, maybe meeting up with us. And if you fancy having a chat, and some of you might not, and that's fine, by the way. But if you're interested in having a 60-minute, no obligation review where we'll sort of talk to you about what you look like and give you some ideas about what our services look like, then, you know, kindly vote. I can see people doing that. We've got some somewhat interested. As I say, it costs nothing to talk to us. We're not pushy. And as I say, we'll call it a day on. Oh, we've got 3. Oh, thank you very much. So if we end the poll there, then I think, Liz, thank you very much. I will stop sharing. There we go. And let's see if we've got any questions? Thanks, Liz, for doing the polls in the background.
That's okay. So one question is, I'm sure that some people who've listened to your presentation will be going home and having a sleepless night. We're in a position, just so that everybody knows, we've engaged Mitigo, and we are undergoing a process of reviewing and making sure that we're okay. But if somebody was going to do one thing today, what would you suggest that one thing should be?
It's the risk assessment. It's just, you've got to understand you've got to understand the problem. Businesses right now are, I said it earlier, they're spending money already, Liz, on this, but they're not spending it in the right way. And actually, you don't have to spend more money. Generally, you've got some firms have got great things in place. They just don't understand what to do with it. So get a risk assessment done. Doesn't have to be us, yeah, but make sure it's not your IT firm. Get an assessment done, get visibility of the problem, then you can start working on the right solution. Your next question might be, yeah, okay, but let's say we don't want to do a risk assessment. What else should we be doing? Crikey, if you haven't got multi-factor authentication switched on everything, get it switched on. Okay, it's not a silver bullet, it won't save you, but it helps. But you saw from that presentation that 3/4 of firms that have it don't set it up properly, so that's hence why you need the independent oversight really for it.
Okay. Another question is, what are the most common data protection mistakes you see in professional services firms? And they're specifically talking about the smaller firms here, not the big accountancy practices.
Okay, so it depends on what sort of breach you're talking about when it comes to data protection. So just first of all, just bear in mind, we're not data protection experts, we're cybersecurity experts. I know I've been talking about GDPR. So yes, you're going to have people that send the wrong data to the wrong people, by mistake, because they pull an email up and it auto fills an email address and you've sent someone's data to the wrong people. But generally, the biggest mistake that firms are making from a cyber security perspective on data breaches is, well, there's a few things. One is they don't understand where their data is. Okay, and what you can find is that data exists in more than one place, and so not understanding where your data is, then you don't necessarily know how to protect it. Okay, because if you've got it on your laptop and you've got it in the cloud and you've got it on a server, then it's in 3 places. If you can then infiltrate as a threat actor into any one of those, the chances are that you're 3 times more likely to have a data breach. But if I hark back to, if you look at Article 32 of GDPR, and I'm not sure many people are going to go away and read it, so let me give you a summary of it. It says that firms must conduct a risk assessment on the security of data that they hold. They must put controls in place around people, technology, and governance. They must test the effectiveness of those controls on a regular basis, and they must have evidence of those things. And so one of the biggest problems we had when I was talking about that accountancy practice that had that breach, the case study that I went through today, what they said to us is, what do we need to do from a reporting perspective? So we said, well, you're going to have to report it to the IC. So obviously when they go to the IC then sit there and say, right, can you show us the risk assessment that you've been through? The firm didn't have a clue that they were meant to be doing that. And then of course, any of those things that sat beneath it, they couldn't prove. And so that's why I don't know what will happen to that firm, because that'll take time for that to come through. But I think the issue is that people work out whether they're a data controller or a data processor, but what they don't do is work out whether they are holding that data in a secure way, because they don't carry out the risk assessment. Sorry, I know I keep banging this drum on risk assessment, yeah, but it all starts with that. You've got to start there.
It's important, yeah. Somebody else has asked us, as a sole practitioner, it's overwhelming. So how does a small business access advice and partner with someone that can facilitate a system at a reasonable cost?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is going to sound like I'm peddling something, but I'm sure there are other companies that can help you. So, look, the majority of our clients, truthfully, are, firms that have got, let's say, more than 10, 15 employees, and they'll go all the way up to 500,000 people. But we do sole practitioner and small business assessments. We can do those as a one-off. What we can do is we can look at the systems that you're using, the devices that you use, and we can give you guidance and assurance that you've got them set up properly. So, for example, is your laptop set up securely? If you're using Microsoft 365, have you configured that in the best way that you can? Is your multi-factor authentication working properly? Is your endpoint protection or your antivirus set up correctly? And so on and so forth. So you can gain some assurance that you're doing that, and in fact, you're probably more likely to be one of those that's more vulnerable because you're on your own. But again, does it cost money? It does cost money. You're going to have to throw, I'll give you a figure, I'm just going to throw it out there, you're going to have to spend a couple of £1,000 probably to get some for someone like us to look at it, but not much more than that. Depends on I guess it's cost versus risk, isn't it, on something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we first started looking at it, I felt I kept using the analogy of it was a bit like Goldilocks. So one option for us was that someone could look at our systems, advise us, off you go and sort it out yourself. We've given you the advice. So that there are those options out there. Another option was, we can give you some advice and we can help you through some of it, and you'll get there and you can use us to have a bit of advice. So that was kind of like the middle option. We did choose to go with you. I'll be very open and honest about that, because we wanted our hands held, and because this is we've engaged with an ongoing service with you, so that it's not just a one-off procedure. We want that advice constantly, and we want the reviews constantly as well, so that it's not just a one thing that you do once and then you're okay, because things evolve all the time. So I just wanted to say there are different levels of options available to people, and you've just got to decide what kind of fits you and your wallet best, I think, in those situations.
I think that's wise advice, Liz, and that's the right. It's a shop around. There are other companies that do it. It's not just us, and you might find something that suits you better. As you say, you went through a process. We were very grateful that you selected us. We're not for everybody, but I think today is, yes, okay. It's a bit. I've had a chance to talk about Mitigo, but it's more of an educational piece, just to say this is what you need to be doing, really, isn't it?
Somebody's asked, how is the use of AI increasing the risk of data breaches in professional services?
I'm sorry, the internet cut out when you said
How is AI increasing the risk of data breaches in professional services?
Okay, so crikey, you've got to look at that. Look at that in two ways, right? So the first is, how are you using AI? Yeah, what are you using it for, and where are you putting your confidential information? So now that's not a cyber risk management. That is a data security problem. It's different. So what do I mean by that? If you're using, let's say, ChatGPT on a free license and you're putting confidential data into that, then you need to understand that data is more than likely going to be being saved and used and being able to be produced by ChatGPT for other users, because it's in a public domain. That's very typical. If, however, you've got a paid license for something like Copilot, which is Microsoft's version, if you like, of ChatGPT, and it's ring fenced, yeah, and you can put your data in, and it doesn't go outside of your organization, then you're going to be, you're not going to have a data breach. But you need to understand, you've got to have a policy. What should they be using, and what shouldn't they be using? What can they put in it? What can't they put in it? So that's your AI policy there. On the flip side of that, you've got to understand that threat actors are using AI to assist with their attacks. I did a webinar recently called AI turbocharging cyber attacks, and it really is turbocharging cyber attacks. Now, it was a good title, but the fact is that criminals are using AI to bypass things very easily. I talked about phishing in that session. There is that they just make, how many of us have put something that we've written and thrown it into AI and said, make this a bit more professional or a little bit more subtle or whatever. We've all done it. Well, most of us are. I certainly do. I need help when I come to writing things, but that's what criminals are doing. That's what AI is for. There is a balance that the technology that defends you against these threats is going to use AI and it's getting better, but that's always a bit of an offset, a bit of a war, unfortunately, a war of who's going to come out on top. But I suppose it's those two things. And just to summarize, is how are you using AI? Where's your data going? You need to get a handle and understand that, and it's your responsibility to do so. Understand that AI is going to increase the chances of you being breached as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. So that's all the questions that we've had in today. As always, if anybody thinks of something after we've ended the webinar, please do feel free to contact me, and then I can send you questions to Kerry after today. I'd like to say thank you very much, Kerry. I mean, it's been really informative. I'm sure that people will be going away a little bit worried.
Sorry about that.
The most important thing is that by attending the webinar, you're thinking about it and you're thinking about things that you may need to do. So I think that's a really important step in the right direction as well.
Yeah, 100%. Well, look, as you said, Liz, anyone can reach out to me or to you, to get to me, as it were, and we can certainly help you. So thanks for attending, everybody. Hope you found it useful, and perhaps we'll see you again next time.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye now.